this way to the left. And now we introduce this idea of negative numbers. 1 unit to the left of 0, the same distance, 1 unit, but to the left of 0 is what we call negative 1. So the distance from negative 1 to 0 is 1. The distance from 0 to 1 is also 1. And so 0 to negative 1 is 1. Negative 1 to negative 2 is also 1. Negative 2 to negative 3 is 1. Negative 3 to negative 4. Negative 4 to negative 5. Negative 5 to negative 6. Negative 6 to negative 7. Negative 8, negative 9, negative 10, etc. And it can keep on going. Negative 11, negative 12, da, 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 da. Also. So now we have this line with negatives to the left, positives to the right, 0 right there is a transition. And these numbers are what we call integers, integers, integers. The numbers that we have written here are integers, but we don't just jump from 0 to 1 and 2 and 3. There are theoretically all these little mini. The line is continuous. There are all these little mini tick marks that we could draw in to represent, let's say, 1/2 or 1/4 or 1/1000, which is super, super teeny, 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 teeny. Can't even really see it. We could estimate where pi would go. Or all kinds of other numbers, irrational numbers and stuff like that. Here we are only looking at integers, meaning our counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have our 0 and then the negative versions of all of those. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. Those are called integers. Integers, integers. Okay, so that's what we're focusing on today. Although you can extrapolate everything for decimals and fractions and stuff like that. Let us focus on these integers, and they can keep on going and keep on going. Okay, so what I want you to keep in mind when we're adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers is that by default, adding is to the right, moving to the right. In general, just moving to the right. And subtracting by default is moving to the left. Moving to the left. We're not talking about where we start, but the idea is to move to the left. Okay? And I say by default because there are little things that will change that. But we start in our minds by thinking adding is moving to the right, subtracting is moving to the left, okay? So, before we get into a specific, situation or a specific problem to demonstrate how this is going to work, let's make a note about how things move along this. We already said negative this way, positive this way, but not only that, on a number line, the numbers that are to the left, rather, if you have two numbers, the one on the left is always going to be smaller than the one on the right. It doesn't matter which two numbers, the one on the left is smaller than the one on the right. So, in other words, the numbers are arranged from smallest to biggest. So, smallest to biggest, smallest to biggest. Okay? So, for instance, if I asked you, is 2 bigger or is 8 bigger? You could locate them on this number line or the number line said, is negative 8 bigger or is negative 1 bigger? Negative 8 is to the left of negative 1. So that means negative 8 is smaller. It's smaller than negative 1. So negative 1 is bigger than negative 8. It's a little counterintuitive, but negative 8 is more negative. It's more to the left, so it's smaller than negative 1. Despite the names positive and negative, though, negative numbers aren't all bad. They're just opposite to our positives, so it's just all relative. Okay, so they just kind of, we need them for balance, and they kind of cancel each other out in a way, but it's not like one's good and one's bad. You can think of it more as like this and then not this, but anyways, you don't have to get too philosophical about it, but they are opposites in a way. Okay, so 2 is smaller than 8, but negative 2 is bigger than negative 8. So we're all kind of centered around this 0. Okay, so we go from smallest to biggest. Alright, dear, I think we are ready to take a look at the general idea for adding and subtracting using this number line. So what I want you to think about is that by default, adding is moving to the right, It doesn't matter where we start, but adding is to the right. And I say by default because there are going to be little things that change that. But we're going to start by assuming we move to the right for adding and move to the left for subtracting. Okay, so when you see like a plus, we're moving generally to the right. And if you see a minus, we're generally moving to the left. So there are different cases if we're adding or subtracting a positive or negative number. Let's start with adding a positive to a positive. So this you probably already know how to do. We could do something like 2 plus 3, okay? But I'm just showing you that we can actually still use this number line to do this, which is really cool. So what we're going to do is start with our first number, whatever it may be. It might be positive, it might be negative. We locate this number. In this case, it is a positive 2. If there's no minus in front or a negative in front, it's a positive 2, right? So we're going to find that 2. Now either you can just read off of this number line. If you've drawn one, you can say, oh, there's my 2, there's a positive 2. So I'm going to start right here. If you want to always start with the 0, you can do that. You start with the 0 and you say positive 2 means to go to the right 2 units. So there's my 2, a 1 and a 2. So this is our little dance, 1 and 2. So we start with our 2. Okay, and then the plus is going to be adding, which we said is moving to the right. Moving to the right by default, right? Which we say by default. So we're going to move to the right 3 units. Now we are adding another positive number to that. So we are going to be moving 3 to the right, okay? So this would be a default situation. 2, 3. 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units, and we're at 5. So 2 plus 3 is 5. 2 plus 3 is 5. Okay? 6 units, right? Because from 0 to -6 is 6 units to the left. So to go from -6 all the way back to 6 or 0, I would have to add 6. But because I only added 4, I didn't quite make it all the way to 0. So my answer is indeed negative. That's one way to kind of, guess and check. Just make sure, not guess and check, just check, double check, that you're on the right track. So you wouldn't expect this to be a positive answer. So if you somehow got, some kind of calculation error, you somehow got something positive, then you can kind of check in a different way, which is to note how far left and right from 0 am I, and how much am I adding? What is the magnitude of what I'm adding? How far are we adding? So I start at -6 and I'm moving to the right 4, but not quite to 6, so I'm still in the negative zone. So -2 is our answer. Okay, so we have a positive and a positive added, and we have a negative adding, and then plus a positive. So now let's talk about adding a negative. Okay, so this is a little bit odd, but if we have, let's say, 5 plus -3, like this, okay? So this is what I mean by setting your default as adding means to the right. So theoretically, we still kind of are, but what happens if we add a negative number now? It gets all kind of confusing. Are we moving to the right? Are we moving to the left? How strange. So again, we start at our 5. That's our first number. Let's locate it. So this is positive 5. So I know I can start at 0 and move 5 units to the right because it's positive. Or I can just notice, oh, there's a 5. Let's plot it. Plop, there's my 5. Then I have a plus. And so by default, adding is to the right. But then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm adding a negative. So I want to go this way, but wait, it's -3. How strange. I kind of want to go there, but whoops, we're going to change directions. We're moving this way, but whoops. So we're actually going to just move left 3. So it turns out that 5 plus -3 is the same thing as 5 minus 3. Okay, and usually when you learn about adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers, you haven't learned about multiplying them yet. So this part seems a little bit weird. You can just memorize that if you have a plus and a minus squished together, it makes a minus. If you have learned about multiplication, you can think about it as a +1 times a -3 and a positive times a negative is negative. Whatever, you can do it however you want. So then we have now 5 minus 3. So that means that if we have a -3, the minus is going to be, by default, moving to the left. So subtract. So subtract it to the left. So in this case, we would have a 5, which is still our 5. And then we're going to move to the left, minus. So move to the left, 3. And now we have a +3 going this way. So 3 units. 1, 2, 3. So here we are at +2. +2. So this plus minus thing like this, if you have it separated like this, conceptually, we start with our first number again, 5. We're adding, so we want to, by default, move to the right. But I'm not adding 3. I'm not doing 5 plus 3. Somehow it now has a 5 plus -3. So it's like, I want to go there, but nope. So I'm going to turn around. I'm just going to turn around and go -3. It's kind of strange to think about adding a negative number, but visually is positive 3. I'm at 2. Okay? Okay, good, good, good. So that's all that we really need, is if we have like a plus, a negative number, it turns us around. And that's why I say by default adding is moving to the right and subtracting is moving to the left. But that's only if we're adding and subtracting positive numbers. If we're adding and subtracting negative numbers, it says, whoops, let's just turn around and go the opposite direction. Okay? It's quite fun. It's a little dance, and sometimes it takes a little bit to get used to, but that's all that we're doing. We're dancing along the number line. Okay, so we're just introducing this idea for now, so I just want to touch on one of each case, or at least as many as I can come up with. But so let's do a one where we start with a negative number. So let's do a negative 4 plus negative 1. Okay, so again, we start with our first number. Don't worry if that's positive or negative. We just start there. So negative 4. So you can locate this again on the number line. Here. You know that it's negative, so it should be to the left of 0. Oh, there it is. Or you can start with 0 and go 1, 2, 3, 4. There you are, negative 4. Then it says plus, which by default I'll go, okay, I'm moving to the right by default. But what do you know? We're adding a negative 1, so whoop, we're going to turn directions. And instead, I'm going to move left 1. So like we said, if it's a plus minus, you can just change that to a minus if you want. You can just go straight away to this if you're comfortable with that. If I used this version, I would just then do negative 4, so that's still my negative 4. Minus by default is subtraction, or minus by default is to move to the left. So I take negative 4 and move to the left 1 unit. And there I am at negative 5. Okay, so both of these are the same, they're equivalent. I shouldn't underline with the thing that looks like an equal sign, but I hope you understand. So negative 4 plus negative 1 visually means to start at negative 4. I'm gonna by default move to the right because I'm adding, but I'm adding a negative 1, so it's like whoop, I'm gonna switch directions and move 1 that way instead, which then works out to be the same thing as starting at negative 4 and just moving to the left 1. Either way, we get a negative 5. Okay, very, very good job. So taking it one step at a time is the key, and if it helps to remember the plus minus is minus, that's fine. It can save you some time, but I know that it gets confusing if we have a mix of negative numbers from the start, and especially if we're combining minus and plus and so just for the sake of really honing in this idea of by default, if I just for whatever reason wanted to do like 5 minus plus 2, this is so unnecessary, but positive 2, you usually just write that as 5 minus 2, right? Like, you don't usually write a plus for positive, but if I happen to do this conceptually, just to really emphasize what we're doing, it would be to locate 5 minus by default, or subtraction by default is to move to the left, and if I have a plus there, it's just to confirm. I'm not saying, oh, switch the opposite, right? Plus is just going to be like, keep going that way, keep going to the 2, so it's the same thing as 5 minus 2. You don't really write it this way, and you never really see this, but it's still very consistent with this concept. Adding is to, by default, move to the right. Subtracting is by default to move to the left. If you're adding a positive, keep going. If you're adding a negative, switch directions. If you're subtracting a negative, switch directions, which we're about to take a look at. So let's say we have 9 minus, well, I guess we already did positive minus, so let's do 0. 1, 2, 3. There's our 3. Now minus by default or subtracting by default means move to the left. So I'm going to move to the left. Oh wait, I'm subtracting -4. So my -4 tells me to switch direction. So I'm by default moving this way, but oh, I'm subtracting -4. So I'm going to move 4 this way. So this is the equivalent of 3 plus 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there you go. We end up at 7. You can also memorize this if you want. If you see a minus, it becomes a plus. So 3 plus 4 is 7. Otherwise, you can try out this moving to the right, moving to the left, moving to the right by default, but then actually moving to the left. You can try this out if you like. And I think this way is usually the most clear and the safest thing, because sometimes it gets confusing if you're starting with the negative. Like if you're just, doing -2 minus -7, that can be confusing. But -2 minus -7, like so. Once you get the hang of it, you won't necessarily need to do this on the number line every single time, but it gives you a visual of whether or not you're going to expect positive or negative. So in this case, I'm starting with a -2. Oops, I said I wouldn't do that. I'm starting with a -2. So that's going to be here, 2 units to the left of 0. Then minus or subtract tells me to move to the left. But oops, I'm minusing or subtracting a -7, so I'm going to turn around and go 7 that way instead. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That takes me to positive 5. So this is the same as -2 plus 7. Minus is the same as plus. And so that would take me to positive 5. Now you can see that -2 plus 7, just as a note, is the same as 7 minus 2. It's interesting, but one way to kind of visualize what's going on here is if I'm starting at -2, it takes 2 units to get back to 0. And then if I did plus 2 and then plus another 5 to get to positive 5. So I don't know, you can do it however you like. However it is that you choose to do this, maybe you're just more familiar with it. You go, -1 plus 8 is positive 7. Eventually we'll get -1 plus 8 is positive 7. Eventually we'll get to moving a little bit quicker with these. Whatever method you use, never ever ever do -9. It's never 2 plus 7 and then negative. The only way that would be the case is if you had a parentheses around it like this. Okay? Like -2. Like that. That's -9 because you do the thing inside the parentheses first. That's order of operations. But if you have a -2 plus 7, do not just pick the part that seems like, okay, I can do this and then do that and then do that first, okay? Don't do that. The -2 comes together. It comes as a team, a pair. Then we're going to add 7 to that. So sometimes it's easy to just jump into the piece like we're more comfortable. We tend to be more comfortable with addition, I feel like. So sometimes people do 2 plus 7 and then put a negative. But the only way we'll really do something like that is if we have this, or if we have like -2 minus 7. Again, we can do this thing that we've been doing. So we place a -2 down, and then minus or subtract means to move to the left, and then we're moving to the left to 7 and truly 7. So we just go negative and count to 7. So it's -9. But conceptually there you can see that if I did 2 plus 7, that is 9. Because if I start at -2 and then I move 7 more, that's the same as going from 0, moving to the left 2, and then moving to the left 7 more. So that's the same as moving from 0 to 9 or -9 this way. So that's why sometimes people will add 2 and 7 to get 9 and then do a negative. Algebraically that works out as well, but that's the only real time that you're adding first, or conceptually just make sure that you know why you're adding and then putting the negative there. Are you doing this all relative to 0? Are you starting with the negative and counting one way or other, starting with positive and counting one way or the other? There are all kinds of little tricks like that, but just make sure, you know, you can always come back to this as a default thing. Start with your first number, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, move to the right or left. By default, if it's a positive number, then just keep going that way. If it's a negative number, switch it, and that's all. That will get you to where you need to go. And other than that, there are little tricks like, you know, if it's a negative and then you're adding a number, it should be bigger, but that if the magnitude of it is, the second one is bigger than the first one, then you end up subtracting the numbers. But if it's smaller, then you're adding them, then putting a negative. It gets like really case by case specific, and I think those will come through practice. So in the next video, or a video coming soon, we'll just do a bunch of practice like this. We will do a few using our number line for review, and then from there you can just watch me work out a bunch of them and see if we can get the hang of it, okay? And see if you can start noticing a pattern. But don't worry. If you're asleep by now, I wish you sweet, sweet dreams. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that this was helpful.